Deconstructing a strong deck. First things first, we need to find a strong deck. So we'll take a look at multiple sources and see if they agree that a deck is considered strong. Let's start by looking at some tier lists. Note that tier lists are not going to definitively tell you which decks are the best, but they can be used as a tool to help us make a more informed decision. We'll be looking at the following tier lists: game widths, game boxes, and different fights. These are the only tier lists that I know of at the time of making this video, but if anyone has any others they'd like to share, please throw them down in the comments and I'll make sure to use them as sources in future videos. Links to all of these sources will be down in the description. All three of these tier lists are based on the Japanese version of the game, so we'll have to look at the tier lists from 3 months ago if we want to look at strong global decks. Fortunately, there is a deck that all three sources agree was tier 1 or 2 from sets 12 to 16, and that is Shadow Paladin's Revengers, making it relevant to both global and JP. Next we'll take a look at tournament results. Fortunately, the Vanguard Zero Winter Championship Grand Final happened recently using set 15. We can see that only one player in the top 3 used Shadow Paladins, but we're not trying to work out what the best deck is, we're trying to determine if Revengers is considered a strong deck. Second place at the event was using Revengers, so we'll take a look at their list. It seems to be the standard build when comparing it to the lists featured on both Game Width and Game Box. The notable flex slots for the deck seem to be the starter, the last grade 3 slot, and the 2 mains. Let's start by looking at our 3 characteristics that make a strong deck: potential damage, advantage generation, and consistency. Potential damage. Every deck can attack 3 times without using any skills, so we'll start with our 3 attacks. Next, we'll add an extra attack due to Raging Form Dragon's skill, which lets you retire 3 Revenger rearguards to Persona Ride another copy from your hand as stand, and gain additional 10k power. This is the only additional attack the deck can produce, due to having to retire 3 rearguards in order to use Raging Form skill, and after retiring the 3 you will only have 2 rearguards, which is not enough to use Raging Form Dragon skill a second time. The deck can however gain a critical using Diamweed, but these skills are both Vanguard Circle only effects, so you can only benefit from one of them at a time. Next, let's take a look at the deck's ability to interfere with rearguards. It runs 4 copy of Blaster Dark Revenger, who can retire a rearguard for the cost of Counterblast 2. If 2 were played during the same turn, the deck could potentially retire 2 interceptors, allowing all 4 of its attacks to potentially hit. Due to Mordred Phantom's Break Ride skill, having access to Blaster Dark is increased greatly, as well as it providing 10k power to the Vanguard and 5k to the rearguard that's superior called via its skill. A potential of 4 damage even with the opponent having 2 interceptors is very strong indeed, especially when the deck can also gain a decent amount of power. Advantage generation. Darkbond Trumpeter has a skill that lets the player pay 1 counterblast to create a 5k power grade 0 rearguard. This can be a booster or be retired for either of Raging Form's skills. This is considered a +1. Blaster Dark is able to counterblast 2 in order to retire a rearguard, minusing the opponent by 1. Dark Cloak Revenger Tartu is able to counterblast 1 in order to call any grade 1 or less Revenger from the deck in the same column as itself. This is a +1, but with the potential to superior call Darkbond Trumpeter, it is a potential +2 if you can pay both of the counterblasts. Skull Witch Nemain allows the player to counterblast 1 to discard a card from their hand to draw 2 cards. This is only a +1 due to having to discard for the skill. Mordred Phantom allows the player to call a grade 2 or less unit from the deck, providing a +1. It also has the potential to superior call Tartu, who could then call Trumpeter, who could then itself create a 5k unit for a potential +3 for only 2 counterblasts. But more often than not, it will call Blaster Dark Revenger to remove an interceptor. Finally, Dark Mage is able to call the top card of your deck for an easy +1, which means the deck plays 17 cards that can generate advantage, which is an enormous amount, on top of which the deck is running 9 draw triggers for a potential 9 extra pluses. Consistency. The deck runs 2 searches in the form of Tartu and Mordred Phantom, allowing for easy access to whatever you might need, giving the deck a sort of toolbox element. The deck doesn't run any traditional trigger fixing, but does have uses for the triggers that are drawn. The heal trigger, for example, is assigned to Diamweed, who has the Revenger name, meaning he can be retired for either of Raging Form Dragon's skills, which means it's not the end of the world if you draw it out, as well as it being a decent backup ride, since it is able to push for additional damage using its skill to gain +1 crit. Mordred is often a strong ride over another Mordred if the player is either unable, unsure, or unwilling to push for game that turn. Finally, the deck is fairly counterblast heavy, but the inclusion of Dorrant reduces the cost of Blaster Dark, allowing an overabundance of counterblast to not cause the deck to feel clunky. The optional slots in this deck don't leave much wriggle room. The Domains could potentially be replaced with an additional Masquerade and Rugos, the 10k vanilla, but that would only be if the player wanted more units with the Revenger name, primarily for Raging Form Dragon's skill. The other option would be the inclusion of Cursed Lancer, who can countercharge when hitting the Vanguard, making the counterblast smoother overall. The starter choice again comes down to wanting the Revenger name. Goat gives the option to dig for a grade 3, such as Mordred or Raging Form, adding a level of consistency to the desired ride line. However, Claudus can be retired for Raging Form Dragon. Most of the cards in the deck are important for it to operate smoothly. Blaster Dark is paramount for removal. Raging Form and Diamweed are necessary for increasing potential damage. Mordred, Tartu, and Trumpeter are all required to generate advantage, as well as Dorrant for consistency. Both of the Masquerades are in the deck purely for power, being able to provide a little added push for when the deck needs it, but these slots are easily the most flexible. Finally, Dark Mage could be replaced with Deathmaster Dragon, again trading advantage generation for consistency by having an additional Revenger. The only caveat here is that the deck only runs 3 non-Revengers, one of which is Dark Mage himself, so the chances of superior calling a non-Revenger from his skill is extremely low. Our 3 tier list sources all agreed that Revengers are a strong deck. The tournament results we looked at have shown Revengers to place highly in an important event, providing more evidence that the deck is in actual fact a strong deck. Using the metrics that I had outlined in my previous videos, I have deconstructed the deck and concluded that the deck has strong potential damage output, strong advantage generation, and above average to strong consistency. Of course, these rankings are only really relevant when compared to other decks in the current meta, which we'll be going over in the future. Thanks for watching.